Imagine a cold chamber hidden deep inside the towering walls of Alexandria's royal palace. It's the year 45 BC. The air is damp. The torches flicker, barely holding the dark at bay. A woman, pregnant, barefoot, bruised, is chained to a stone slab. Her eyes are wide with terror. She knows what's coming. She's heard the whispers. But no prayer will save her now. In the silence, footsteps echo, slow, heavy, certain. And then she enters, Cleopatra, not the goddess-like queen from statues, not the seductress from silver screens. No, this is Cleopatra After Dark, the one who ruled not with silk but steel. Her presence chills the air. Her eyes, not kind, curious, cold, calculating. She leans close to the captive, smiles like death in a silk robe, and then she says it, soft as a whisper, sharp as a blade. I want to see how life is born. What followed wasn't a cry for help. It was a scream that clawed through the marble halls. One swipe, one command, and a life cut open just to satisfy a queen's morbid thirst for knowledge. This wasn't a story told to frighten children. This wasn't fiction. This was Cleopatra, the queen, the scholar, the monster. Behind her legend lies a labyrinth of secrets soaked in blood, betrayal, and twisted love. So let's tear the curtain down and stare into the darkness behind Egypt's golden throne. First, let's talk about her bloodline, the root of all rot. Cleopatra 7. Cleopatra was not some exotic beauty born of divine light. She was the product of incest, a lineage of kings and queens who married their own brothers and sisters in the name of divine purity. But purity has a price. Her family tree was a circle, and from that circle came madness. The Ptolemaic dynasty, Greek by blood, Egyptian by rule, was a snake eating its own tail. Her father, Ptolemy the Thene, was her uncle's child. Her mother, probably a cousin. And then Cleopatra herself would marry two of her own brothers. First Ptolemy the Thene, then Ptolemy XIV. It wasn't love. It was strategy. Royal tradition. But incest always brings gifts of its own. Twisted genetics, hidden curses. Cleopatra was no exception. She was brilliant, yes, educated, cunning. But the world never spoke of the other side. The way her features twisted expectations. A hooked nose, bulging eyes, her body heavy with inherited weight. These weren't the curves of Aphrodite. They were the trademarks of generations breeding inside a cage, and yet men fell for her. They bent kingdoms at her feet, not because of how she looked, but because of how she made them feel. Cleopatra could make a man believe he ruled the world just before she reminded him who truly did. But don't mistake charm for mercy. Her court wasn't a place of wine and music. It was a cage of lions, ruled by a woman who never forgot that power was a game of death. Her lovers didn't just fall for her, they disappeared for her. Many never woke after her kiss. Men were tools, and when tools grow dull, they get discarded. Even the greatest, Julius Caesar and Mark Antony, fell under her spell. But Cleopatra didn't love like the poets dreamt. She used love like a sword. Politics in bedclothes, survival through seduction. If she needed an empire, she took it from a man's pillow. If she needed silence, well, the walls of Alexandria were thick, and screams never lasted long. What kind of woman watches a pregnant girl die just to satisfy curiosity? What kind of queen poisons her own lovers just to keep their mouths shut? What kind of legend rises not on beauty, but on blood? You're starting to understand. Cleopatra wasn't just a ruler. She was a riddle, a shadow, a storm wrapped in silk, and this is just the beginning. The Roman sun burned hot the day Julius Caesar arrived in Alexandria. 48 BC. His legions stood like wolves at the gate. Egypt was on the brink. Civil war raged, Cleopatra's grip on the throne slipping through her fingers like sand. Her brother, Ptolemy XIII, had driven her into exile. She was queen in name only, but Cleopatra had no intention of staying in the shadows. And Caesar, he didn't know it yet, but he was already trapped, not by swords, by a woman. She didn't walk into Caesar's court. She was delivered, smuggled inside the palace, rolled up in a carpet like contraband. And when the cloth unfurled, out she came, her wild eyes gleaming, wrapped in silk and danger. Imagine that moment. A Roman general at the peak of his power, face to face with a queen in exile, barefoot and defiant. No crown, no army, just words, and she spoke them like fire. That night something shifted in Caesar. No one knows exactly what she said, but by morning the Roman lion was purring at her feet. He sent troops to crush her brother's forces, declared Cleopatra queen once more, and by the time the Nile ran red with Ptolemy's defeat, Cleopatra was already heavy with Caesar's child. She called the boy Caesarion, Little Caesar, insurance. But don't mistake this for a love story. This was survival, strategy. Cleopatra saw what most women feared, that power lived not in thrones or armies, but in influence. And influence, she knew, was most easily harvested from desire. She didn't beg Rome for help. She seduced it. Caesar believed he was shaping her destiny. But in truth, he had already stepped into her trap. Because Cleopatra didn't want a savior, she wanted a god. Rome, though, was not Egypt. And Caesar's affair with an Eastern queen, foreign, pagan, powerful, was poison in the Senate's eyes. Whispers grew louder. Rumors rotted respect. Some claimed she bewitched him. Others said she aimed to sit beside him on Rome's throne. One thing was certain. His downfall began the moment he took her hand. When Caesar returned to Rome, Cleopatra followed. In style, a royal procession. Foreign perfumes. Silk that shimmered like oil on water. She didn't try to fit in. She forced Rome to watch, and Rome hated her for it. To the people, she was not a queen. She was a sorceress, a threat, a woman who dared move like a man. Behind her, Caesar began to crumble. He named himself dictator for life. Installed Cleopatra in a private villa. Spoke of raising Caesarion as his heir. Rome grew restless. The Senate sharpened its knives, and on the Ides of March they struck. 23 times blood soaked the marble floor. The body of the most powerful man in the world lay still, and Cleopatra. She did not cry, she did not wail, she disappeared. Some say she returned to Egypt with Caesar's child hidden in her robes. Others say she stayed, watching Rome descend into chaos, planning her next move. Because Cleopatra didn't panic when power died, she waited for it to be reborn. Mark Antony would be next. But before we get to him, remember this: Julius Caesar, the man who broke Gaul, who defied the Senate, who declared himself king in all but name, was undone not by war, but by love, or at least what he thought was love. Cleopatra offered him a future drenched in gold and gods, but she never gave him a second chance. No man got one. It was 41. BC. The Mediterranean wind carried whispers. Rome was still bleeding, Caesar was gone, and a new power struggle had begun. 3 men now held the remains of the empire in their hands: Octavian, Lepidus, and Mark Antony. Antony, the warrior, the drinker, the womanizer. But more than that, Caesar's most trusted friend, the man who swore to avenge him, and Cleopatra. She was watching. She knew exactly who to call next. He summoned her first, actually. Antony wanted answers. Egypt owed Rome loyalty and tribute. But Cleopatra didn't send gold or grain. She sent silence. And when Antony grew impatient, she offered him something far more dangerous, herself. She didn't come crawling to him. She sailed. Aboard a golden barge. Sails dyed purple, silver oars cutting the water like knives. Her throne shimmered under the Egyptian sun. Her servants were dressed as gods. Musicians played as she approached. No army, no threat, just beauty, mystery, and power wrapped in perfume. Antony, arrogant and battle-worn, thought he was summoning a puppet queen. But what landed on the shores of Tarsus was no pawn. It was the queen of the board. They met in the middle of a feast. Cleopatra arrived hours late, on purpose. She wanted Antony to wait, to hunger. And he did. The moment he saw her, the stories say, he forgot his purpose. Forgot Caesar. Forgot Rome. She didn't flirt. She conquered. Over wine and figs, she spun spells with her voice. She matched him in drink, in wit, in recklessness. Cleopatra didn't try to charm Antony. She out-Antonied him, and when he followed her back to Alexandria, people knew another Roman had fallen. Hard. Together, they turned Alexandria into a fever dream. Nights of wine-drenched debauchery, games in the streets, music echoing from palace halls until dawn. They formed a private club, the Inimitable Livers, where they played gods among mortals. Lavish banquets, golden cups, women and men alike draped in decadence. But underneath the parties, a darker game played out. Cleopatra didn't love Antony. She used him, just like she had Caesar. Through him, she secured more land for Egypt, military power, recognition for Caesarion as the rightful heir. Her dynasty was growing, her grip tightening. Antony, once a master of war, was becoming a shadow. Her shadow. Rome watched in disgust. To them, Antony had become a joke, the mighty general now groveling in the arms of a foreign queen. They claimed she'd turned him into a eunuch, bewitched by her drugs, her flesh, her honeyed words. Even Octavian, Caesar's adopted son, began to plot his downfall. Still, Antony stayed. Some say he was mad with love, others say he was too deep to escape. But Cleopatra, she saw the writing on the wall. She knew Antony wasn't Caesar. He was weaker, more volatile, and in time more dangerous. Still, she played her part. She gave him twins, raised temples in his name, promised him the East as long as he stayed by her side. But when Octavian declared war, when Rome turned its eyes to Egypt, Antony hesitated. And Cleopatra? She prepared for the storm. By now even her lovers feared her. Antony's men whispered of poison rings, of guards who never returned from her private chambers, of young servants gone missing after a single mistake. Her own people began to wonder if their queen had traded her soul for power, and perhaps she had, because Cleopatra didn't blink when blood was needed. She didn't flinch when power called for sacrifice, and she didn't stop when her kingdom began to crumble. The war with Rome was coming. Her days of charm were ending. Soon, the blood would flow again, and this time, it wouldn't be the blood of prisoners, it would be her own. The sea was restless that morning, September the 2nd, 31st BC, a date carved into the bones of history, the Battle of Actium. On one side, Rome, with Octavian at its helm, cold, calculating, a man bred not for pleasure but for domination. On the other, Cleopatra and Mark Antony, lovers turned warlords, their ships stretched across the Ionian Sea, sails snapping in defiance. But defiance was not enough. Not that day. Antony had lost his edge. Gone was the commander who once conquered armies and commanded legions. What remained was a man worn thin by drink, by pride, and by Cleopatra. His decisions were erratic, his loyalty split, not between Rome and Egypt, but between his identity and hers. He thought Cleopatra was his strength, but others saw it as his weakness. The morale in his ranks was rotting. Roman soldiers under his banner didn't fight for Egypt. They fought for gold, and gold can run dry. Men talked behind his back. They called him the Queen's pet, the eunuch of Alexandria. Rumors had teeth, and every bite sank deeper. Cleopatra, meanwhile, watched the skies. She wasn't a general, but she understood something Antony didn't: when to retreat, when to cut ties, when to live for another day. So she made preparations, secret ones. While Antony drew up battle formations, she stocked her ships with treasure, food, and her most loyal guards. Not for the battle, for the escape. The battle began at dawn. Over 400 warships collided under a choking sun. Fire arrows lit the sky. Men screamed, burned, drowned. Antony's ships were heavier, more armored, but slower. Octavian's fleet moved like snakes, cutting around them, setting them ablaze. And then, at the worst possible moment, Cleopatra turned. Her fleet, 60 ships strong, broke formation and sailed straight through the chaos, away from the battle. She ran. Historians still argue why. Did she panic? Did she see the battle was lost? Or was it always the plan? Whatever the truth, Antony saw her sails vanish across the horizon, and something inside him shattered. He abandoned command, left his men. his allies, his war. He followed her. By nightfall, the sea was red with defeat. Octavian stood victorious. Rome had won. Antony and Cleopatra were fugitives, back in Egypt. Alexandria once again became a city waiting to fall. The lovers had returned, yes, but this time there were no parties, no golden barges, no gods in silk. Just shadows on marble and whispers in every hall. Antony grew paranoid. Violent, he ordered executions. He accused old friends of treachery. But Cleopatra? She remained calm, not because she had hope, because she had options. Rumors say she tried to negotiate with Octavian in secret. She offered her crown, her treasure, even betrayal, suggesting she'd give up Antony to save Egypt and Caesarion. No proof survives, but would it surprise you? Not if you knew her. Antony eventually learned that she'd hidden a tomb away from the palace. That she was practicing her death. She never confirmed it. She didn't need to. The walls were closing in, and even Cleopatra couldn't seduce her way out of this one. Then came the final lie. Cleopatra locked herself in her mausoleum and sent word to Antony. She's dead. Some say she did it to test his love. Others say she did it to push him away. Or maybe it was one last game. A queen's move on a crumbling board. But Antony, already broken, didn't pause to think. He took his sword and drove it into his own gut. As he lay bleeding out on cold stone, news came. She's alive, he laughed, not in joy and ruin. His servants carried him dying, wheezing to her tomb. He died in her arms. Some say she wept, others say she watched emotionless, until his final breath left his body. One more man buried by her love. One more empire turned to ash. Now the queen stood alone. No more lovers, no more lies, just death at the door. And Egypt, the crown she'd bled for, slipping through her fingers. The walls of her tomb were closing in. It was August 12th, 30 BC. Alexandria had fallen. Roman banners fluttered from the palace rooftops. Octavian, soon to be Augustus, stood at the gates of history, and Cleopatra, queen of Egypt, stood at the end of hers. Antony was gone. His blood had soaked the floor of her mausoleum just days before. And now, with Rome inside the walls, Cleopatra was no longer a queen. She was a prize. Octavian didn't want her dead. He wanted her paraded, a living symbol of his triumph, humiliated, shackled, dragged through the streets of Rome. While the crowd jeered and spat, that's how Romans celebrated victory, by breaking gods into dirt. But Cleopatra had not fought her whole life, had not seduced emperors, spilled blood, and outlasted betrayal just to become a prop in someone else's glory. So when the offer came, surrender, or die in chains, she smiled and chose a third door. They say she spent her last night in silence. She bathed, dressed in her finest linen, braided her hair with gold and perfume. Not the look of a prisoner, the look of a goddess preparing for death. She wrote a letter to Octavian, calm and composed, thanking him, requesting burial beside Antony, and then she disappeared behind the tomb's heavy doors. What happened next is wrapped in myth. The official Roman report claimed she was found lying peacefully on a couch, dressed in royal robes, with two of her maidservants dead beside her. No violence, no struggle, just a queen asleep forever. But the cause, that's where the mystery begins. Some say it was poison, a draught hidden in a pin, or soaked into figs she requested as her last meal. Others claim it was a hollow comb laced with venom, quick, silent, undetectable. But the story that stuck, the one whispered through generations, is this. She let a snake kill her, a sacred asp, smuggled into the tomb in a basket of fruit, a symbol of royalty, a weapon of the old gods. They say she held it in her hands, let it strike once, maybe twice. And as the venom coursed through her veins, she laid back on silk and waited, not screaming, not sobbing, just watching the ceiling fade, because Cleopatra didn't fear death. She feared insignificance. When Octavian received her letter, it was too late. He rushed to the tomb, But the doors were sealed, his prize was gone, her body, cold, still, divine, was beyond his reach. His triumph over her would never be complete. She denied him that final victory. Her burial remains a ghost story. No one knows where she lies. Some say her tomb was hidden beneath the sands, flooded by time, protected by curses and silence. Others believe she was cremated in secret, her ashes mixed with Antony's. As she requested, Rome tried to erase her, but her myth refused to die, because Cleopatra didn't just end her life, she crafted her death. Like everything else in her rule, it was calculated, symbolic, devastating. She chose the timing, the method, the legacy. And in doing so, she robbed her enemies of the one thing they craved most, control. Even in death, she ruled, not Egypt, not Rome, but history, and history bowed its head. He was just 17, Caesarion, born of Rome and Egypt, the only son of Julius Caesar, at least the only one Cleopatra claimed. His name meant Little Caesar, but there was nothing small about the target on his back. After Cleopatra's death, the city held its breath. The queen was gone, Antony was gone, and Rome had won. But one question still burned in every corridor of Alexandria. What would Octavian do with the boy? Caesarion had been raised like a pharaoh, draped in silk, fed from golden plates, taught to believe he was not just royalty, but divinity. His mother filled him with ideas of destiny, that he would rule both Egypt and Rome, that Caesar's blood made him untouchable, but destiny doesn't matter when Rome smells fear. And Octavian? He wasn't here to share power. At first, there was talk of mercy. Octavian even pretended to welcome Caesarion as King of Kings. It was theater, just long enough to keep the people calm, to stop revolts, to let Egypt fall quietly into his hands. But once the palace was secured, once Cleopatra's treasure was looted, once the ship sailed and her supporters were silenced, he gave the order, kill the boy. There were no trials, no speeches, no last rites. Caesarion was captured while fleeing toward Nubia, accompanied by a few loyal guards. He probably thought he had a chance, some foreign king, some forgotten ally, maybe even hope. But hope doesn't live long under empire, and the last of Cleopatra's bloodline died not with a roar, but with a whisper, hung from a rope, or stabbed in the dark. The details were buried with him, just another name, scratched out of the royal scrolls. With Caesarion gone, the Ptolemaic dynasty was finished. 3 centuries of rule wiped out, and the world turned. Back in Egypt, the priests remained quiet. The temples lit no fires. The Nile flowed as it always did, indifferent to kings and corpses. The throne room sat empty. The gold was gone. And in the hush of a country that once called itself divine, whispers of Cleopatra still echoed, "I want to see how life is born." Now it was death that ruled. They tried to erase her, to smear her name, to reduce her to a seductress, a distraction, a foreign danger. But time plays favorites, and Cleopatra, through scandal, through legend, through fear, refused to vanish. She lived on in scrolls, in poems, in nightmares, not just as a queen, but as a warning. Centuries passed, empires rose and crumbled, temples turned to ruins, and Cleopatra, the woman, the queen, the storm, became something else entirely, a story, but not her own. No, the men who conquered her, rewrote her, Octavian, now Augustus, began the first campaign of historical assassination. He didn't just kill Cleopatra. He branded her. In Roman records, she became a snake, a temptress, the wicked foreigner who bewitched noble Antony, poisoned Caesar's bloodline, and threatened to infect Rome with Eastern corruption. It was genius. Really, Rome couldn't allow her to die as a martyr, or worse, a hero. So they painted her in venom, turned her brilliance into seduction, her political strategy into sexual manipulation, her ambition into madness, and just like that, the last queen of Egypt became a myth soaked in. Shame, but myths don't stay silent, and Cleopatra's ghost refused to sleep. Every generation found something new in her. The early Christians saw her as a harlot, a warning against women with power. Painters turned her final moments into soft, sensual poses, bare skin, parted lips, a snake slipping into her bosom. Tragedy wrapped in desire, Shakespeare would come next. His Cleopatra, passionate, wild, broken by love. A drama queen dying for a man, not for her country, not for her pride, not on her terms, for him. But where was the real Cleopatra? The one who ruled alone at 18, who spoke 9 languages, who outmaneuvered generals and stabbed gods in the dark. Where was the woman who took death in her own hands just to keep her name from being paraded in chains? Lost, buried beneath centuries of male egos and Western storytelling, because the truth was dangerous. A woman like her, brilliant, cruel, political, sexual, sovereign, didn't fit their stories, so they twisted her. Even modern historians fought over her image. Was she black? Was she white? Was she beautiful? Was she ugly? Every theory turned her into a battleground of identity. Each culture wanted to claim her. Each movement wanted her on their banner. Feminists hailed her as a rebel. Critics called her a cautionary tale. Hollywood turned her into Elizabeth Taylor, but rarely, so rarely, did they speak of the girl who inherited a fractured throne in a dying empire and really fought, to hold it together with blood, wit and seduction as weapons. She was no victim. She used the tools she had. When strength meant diplomacy, she was a diplomat. When charm worked, she charmed. And when the time came for death, she made it beautiful, untouchable, because Cleopatra understood one thing better than anyone: legacy outlives flesh, and if the world was going to remember her, she would make damn sure it remembered on her terms, even now. In every story written, every film made, every debate sparked, Cleopatra wins. She stays relevant, she stays dangerous, she stays alive. Centuries have passed, the throne is dust, the pyramids stand silent. The Nile still flows, indifferent to memory, but Cleopatra, she still breathes, not in body, in myth. You can't bury a woman like her. They tried. Oh, how they tried. Octavian crushed her empire. Historians dragged her name through the mud. Poets turned her into a lover. Preachers turned her into a warning. Scholars turned her into a question mark, but none of them, none, could make her disappear. She is everywhere, in paintings, etched with gold and poison. In plays, whispering final lines to dying men. In politics, invoked when a woman dares too much. In films, eyes painted thick, hips swaying like war drums. Every era takes her, bends her, rebuilds her. Yet the core remains, a woman who bent kingdoms to her will and made death her final act of sovereignty. And maybe that's what frightens them most. Not that she ruled, but that she ruled without apology. She wasn't kind. She wasn't gentle. She was effective. She knew how to make men fall. She knew how to make enemies vanish. She knew how to lose a war, but win the story, and stories are harder to kill than queens. Today, we search for her tomb, desperate, obsessed. We dig through the desert, through layers of time, chasing her ghost, but she doesn't need a grave. She became legend. What more tomb does she need? She teaches something dangerous to every woman who hears her name, that power isn't always granted. Sometimes you take it, sometimes you seduce it, sometimes you bleed for it, but once you have it, you never beg for permission to keep it. Cleopatra wasn't a fantasy, she wasn't fiction. She wasn't just a lover of great men. She was a great woman, clever, merciless, magnetic, terrifying. She was the blade in the dark. The last pharaoh, the queen of masks, and when history tried to strip her bare, she dressed herself in legend. She is every secret women keep, every ambition they bury, every price they pay for daring to rule in a world built by men. And somewhere beneath sand and silence, her bones may rest, but her shadow never stopped moving.